And now for part two of our canoe trip down Nippersink Creek for Tom Talks.
All right, this is something I really wanted to show you today. Jackie is standing on one shore of the old Nippersink Creek, and I'm standing on the other. Now that may seem like a strange thing to say, but I'll show you an inset image here that shows you that meander scar in the Nippersink Valley. You don't know how long ago this was. I'm walking out into what would have been the middle of the stream many centuries ago. Most of this vegetation here is lake sedge and native sedge of standing water. We have burr reed here, Sparganium, Eurycarpum plants. Really a high quality wetland occupying what was formerly Nippersink Creek. Now there is some sediment in here. I mean, this was grazed by livestock for a century or more. So there's certainly sediment in here, but in the diagram it will show you just how much the sediment is and how deep below my feet was the actual stream bottom. You can core down through these muds and strike gravel, and that's where you know the elevation of the stream bottom. And what I did was compare the elevation of numerous parts in this old meander scar with the present creek that we were just in the kayaks, and found out that the floor of the stream many centuries ago was about 2 feet higher than it is today on average. And so this is what I'm talking about when we talked about at that first big ripple, the entrenchment of streams. Dramatically changing the watershed, much more water released into the stream after a hard rain or after snow melt. And then all of that rushes down the stream at once, and it creates a much larger feature in the landscape than a stream that was drained that very different landscape many centuries ago. So in stream restoration, we can restore some things, we can't restore others. We can't restore the entire watershed of Nippersink Creek without buying the entire area, which is of course impossible. So we have to make do with a very different watershed and deal with a very different stream. We call them both Nippersink Creek, but they're really two very different streams.
What I wanted to do right now is to talk just a little bit more about that last scene in that tiny little stream that used to be Nippersink Creek that wasn't nearly as deeply entrenched as the modern one. And there are two issues there. One is the size of the stream, and one is the degree of entrenchment. And first, let's deal with the entrenchment. How on earth could a stream that's been running through the same valley for 18,000 years not entrench? And then in less than 200 years, entrench several feet, in some cases more than that, depending where you're looking along the course of Nippersink, several feet down into its bed. How could it not have done that for 18,000 years? That was always hard for me to believe until I realized that I was forgetting something, and that is the role of beaver in the hydrology of Midwestern streams. If we re-envision Nippersink Creek not as a linear feature running through the landscape, but rather as a series of beaver ponds, we can see that regardless of how long you have a series of beaver ponds, and the beaver ponds will move around from time to time as beaver abandon one pond and build another. But if what we call the stream is really a series of ponds, then it's obvious why it never entrenched. And so that's one of the key things that came out of those early Nippersink studies and my continued interest in the stream. And the other one is the tiny size of Nippersink Creek and that fossil stream meander. How on earth could that tiny little stream have carried the same amount of rainwater, we assume about the same, in the past as it is today? And I think probably the answer is it didn't. And the reason it didn't is because of the massive change in the drainage of the landscape since European settlement. Water doesn't stay on the landscape. Now when it falls, it rapidly moves into some sort of conduit above ground, below ground. It moves to a stream, and one small stream, the big stream, the bigger stream, and then out of the area where 200, 300 years ago, it just sat there on the landscape for a long period of time. It evaporated. Now that may not seem like a key feature, but in fact it is, because the potential evaporation in our area is about the same as the rainfall. So if all the water just sat there, it would evaporate every year. So the more you hold water back, the more you keep it in the landscape, keep those broad, flat prairies wet, the more water evaporates into the air and the less that's released into surface conduits and into streams. So really, those little tiny little streams didn't carry as much water as they did in the past, not even on a yearly basis. So it's remarkable what you find out when you start studying just this one little stream running through northern Illinois.
Well, what we have here is a classic example of an oxbow meander. On my left was where the water would enter the meander. It did a loop and it came out on my right. If you look at the 1939 aerial photograph, which I'll show in inset here, you can see that the stream is flowing through that meander bend. But at some point between that and about 1955, I think that was the next aerial photograph, that meander was cut off. Now, whether people had anything to do with that and straightening the stream, it's hard to say. Certainly, it was about to be cut off by natural processes anyway. But this is a classic example of an oxbow meander. The meander keeps getting more and more exaggerated until eventually the two loops on either side come together, cut it off, and the stream leaves it behind as a shallow wetland or sometimes a lake, depending on how large the stream is. We see here sort of dramatic evidence of the undercutting of the banks of the stream. This big oak tree has come down within the last couple of years. I have a cross-section measurement very near here that goes up right next to that oak that just toppled, is about half toppled in now. So this was, that one was stable on top of the bank just a couple of years ago. But when you combine losing more and more soil under the tree with the wind from the wrong direction, and eventually it starts to go over. So just a dramatic bit of evidence of how the stream is changing even over the last few years. Particularly nice spot here along the stream with these big oak trees. Why don't we just sit and listen to the birds for a few minutes? Do here is to really talk just a little bit about the Army Corps of Engineers restoration project completed fairly recently. If you look behind me along the banks, you see the absence of something that's seen quite often in the background. Those are those tall cut banks. The Army Corps graded back the banks at a very low angle and planted a native vegetation, so it really has a very pretty natural feel to it along the edges of the streams. So it's one of the things they did to reduce bank erosion, but also right in front of me is another riffle. Now these riffles in the Army Corps, there are 7 of them. very subtle in comparison to those big riffles we have gone through before. Each one of these changes the stream level only a couple of inches. But you add them all together and you get a substantial change in stream level. Believe me, I've walked across these streams doing surveying both before and after the Army Corps project, and it's a lot deeper than it used to be, which is good. The deepness does several things. One is that we're bringing the stream level back to where, at least closer to where it was in a pre-European settlement landscape, and so the stream is a little closer to the parameters it used to operate under a long time ago, but it's also important to the vegetation out there, because when you raise the stream level, you raise the water table in the land around the stream, and that allows you to restore the wetland vegetation that's been there for thousands of years but disappeared over the last few centuries. So there's a number of reasons for raising that stream level. One of them is the stream itself, and another one is really restoring the watershed of the stream. Just back there exploring this is the outlet of Lost Valley Marsh and Glacial Park. Marsh was restored before we did the de-channelization, the initial de-channelization of Nippersink back in the 1990s. You can look at lots of aerial photographs and see when the marsh was a cornfield back in the 1960s. So we've done lots and lots of restoration work around here.
So if the watershed can't really be fixed and streams are always changing, why do you even bother restoring a stream?
It's a really great question, Jackie. It's even better question than you think it is. And it's one that I think really applies to all restoration. Lost Valley Marsh isn't exactly like it was 300 years ago. None of Glacial Park is like it was 300 years ago. We face this if you want to call it a difficulty in all kinds of restoration, because you can't make the clock go backwards. So the question is why even try? Why, if you can't finish something exactly perfectly, then why try? And I think that really approaches the topic from the wrong direction. What we're trying to do here is not to create a perfect landscape, but to make a better one, and a better one from the point of view of what it used to be. So when we restored Nippersink Creek, I mean, I've already showed you an old fossil meander of the stream that's much, much smaller. So this stream is really much bigger. It has a very different watershed. We could never make it look the way it did 300 years ago. What we can do is to take a stream that had been dramatically changed during the farming era, and that really stretches over 150 years, in which there was an awful lot of animal waste dumped into it, where it was channelized, ditched. We can take that stream and return many features that are far more like the streams of the past. By putting in the riffles, we make the pools deeper. We have a much richer diversity of native fish in Nippersink Creek. We have a diversity of native mussels because we have riffles and we have deep pools. We have a richer diversity of native aquatic insects because of that. So, and the same goes along the banks. Look along the stream. These are native plants you're looking at. Partly they're there because of the hard efforts of the crews that were working during this last phase of the Nippersink Restoration Project, but partly it's a result of stream restoration, raising the water level of the stream, re-wetting that ground so it will support wetland vegetation again. Is it exactly the same as it was? Of course it isn't. But it holds many of the native species of Illinois wetlands there, and that's what we can accomplish through restoration. It's not even trying to turn the clock back. That's impossible. No one can do that. But we can look at the past. We can think of it as a model for how we can treat the land in the present and the future. That's really what we're doing here in restoration. We're trying to make the landscape more habitable to all the plants and animals of the landscape, and to a greater or lesser extent, as much as we can achieve it, to make it look like it used to. stream is a wonderful example because the stream is so dynamic and so changing, and you can't make it stand still. And we've seen that over and over and over again today. Everywhere we stop and look closely at the stream, you can see how it's changed over the last centuries, the last few years, the last decades. Farmers, the conservation district people here, the contractors, just all these people that have changed the stream. And so, in that context, you understand what restoration is. It's not trying to hold the world steady in a steady state in one place, but really using the past as a model for how the dynamics in the landscape and the present can give a place to live, really, for the native plants and animals going on. We just crossed under the Prairie Trail. And the land behind me looks quite different from what you've been looking at in the last few shots, because we're still in the Army Corps of Engineers restoration project, but on this side they did the riffles, and so the stream levels were adjusted and raised using the riffles, but they didn't grade the banks back, so we'll see banks that are still pretty rough in appearance, but the water levels have been raised, and so it has the same effect really in terms of the wetness or dryness of the surrounding landscape. So we're going to see something a little bit different in the next few minutes. So we've just come under the Prairie Trail, and we're going through a section of stream that has really tall cut banks behind me. It's cutting into a section of the moraine, the Glacier Moraine. It gets even a little more pronounced up ahead. Has a nice oak grove on it. But even behind you, it's a fairly tall cut bank, and this is unusual to see a steep cut bank on both sides of the stream. You expect the stream to be depositing sediment on one side and eroding on the other. But I'm going to pose a hypothesis to you, and we'll look at it both in the with some aerial views and where I mark out a few stream channels, that this isn't where the stream was 200 years ago. When the railroad went through, which is now the Prairie Trail, they rerouted the stream in order to make it easy on the railroad. And that's what I think we're going to look at here in just a minute. So here we are where I think the Nippersink Creek used to come out right behind me and continue in this direction. And the part behind Jackie over in that direction is the part that was dug in by the railroad in order to get the creek away from the Prairie Trail, what was then the railroad right-of-way. And on the map you see in the corner of the screen now, you can see several possible pathways of the original stream, some of which may be more likely than others. I think all of them, the stream was in at one time or another. The question is only, where was it when the railroad had encountered it? And I suspect it was in that path that sort of paralleled the railroad or the Prairie Trail for a time, and that would have been pretty unacceptable. What you want to do is to have the stream cross sort of at right angles to the railroad, which I think is why they turned the stream and created this section of stream we just went through in order to get the water away from the railroad. So the reason I stopped here is because we have a really nice exposure of glacial till. The Nippersink is undermining an area of glacial moraine here. It's about 18,000-year-old glacial till. Very compact material, sort of a clay loam, maybe a little bit of very fine sand in there. A very classic glacial till. And a wonderful exposure. You can see the line of wetting. The recent rains have wetted the soil down to about here. This is still dry. See the A horizon up there. A little hard to make out the E horizon, which should be apparent. This is an old woodland soil. So it's just a neat thing you get to see along streams. right behind me is a really tall cut bank, and I've noticed this the whole 15 years I've been going down the Nippersink, and I always wondered about that. But if you look at the geologic maps and the topographic map, which I'm showing you in the inset, you can see there's an area of the Glacier Moraine, a ridge of the Glacier Moraine that runs right through here. And we've been seeing sort of the bits and pieces of that for the last couple of stops where I've pointed out the glacial till. Here you're just seeing where we're going through a fairly high area of the Glacier Moraine. And so presumably 18,000 years ago when the water first burst through this area of Glacier Moraine, it had to cut through this area and left some tall banks. So probably tall cut banks have just been a feature of this part of the stream for a very, very long time. Well, we've arrived at Pioneer Landing now, and sort of sorry to get here because it's been a fun trip. But the theme of the trip has been the changing stream. This is a good place to end it because behind me is a little bit of change, really. That's a delta of sediment built out into Nippersink Creek from the tributary stream coming in from my right. And that tributary stream comes out into the delta and then turns right and comes out right behind me and building this little sub-delta of sediment just to my left. There's the soft stem bulrush. You saw these earlier. This is the long-leaf pondweed. Got white water lilies along the edge here. Lots of native sedges along the banks. The purple, pinky purple flowers are the spotted joe pieweed. Lots of native plants. Wonderful place to end the trip. Just a place where the stream is changing day by day and is just beautiful. Thanks for coming.
Like a river round that went wandering way round trouble bends past riffle race and quiet pool and slips back to its quiet cool sweet spring again. Asphalt rivers rise and fall like a gentle song. They call me back to place and grace and home, to paths that I have often roamed, ever to return again. Driving on, I see no end. River round returns again, through gently rolling field and wood, through fen and marsh and prairie good. We go round again. Round a river silent finds a source, dust to ashes stay its course, knowing where it will lead across the plain, just to bleed to the ground again. Driving on, I see no end. River round returns again, through gently rolling field and wood, through fen and marsh and prairie good. We go round again. The ancient earth gives birth anew, round and round and round and round, all fresh and clear, young and cold too. Round and round and round and round, so sacred, pure, to hold too near, too intimate for us to feel. Round and round and round and round, so touch and touch.